psychmates, today we're going to talk about the timeline of psychology. But before that, let me go back in 36 roots from the history of psychology before it was a well-known branch of science today. Did you know that before the mid-1800s, psychology wasn't even known as a branch of science, but it was known as a branch of philosophy? So you might be wondering, what is its name before? Or what are the so-called practices that this psychologist before used? So the term used before psychology was called mental philosophy. And it is focused, or its aim is more on the philosophical side, like how do we exist, how do we function, or what's the consciousness, what's its structure. And would you believe that psychology isn't a helping profession before, nor does it apply scientific methods? So let's go to the practices. So the practices before were called as pseudo-scientific practices or pseudoscience. When we call pseudoscience, it means that it appears that it has a scientific basis, but it has no true legal scientific evidences, or it doesn't show on the experiments. Some of the pseudoscientific processes or practices that they have used before was phrenology, physiognomy, we have animal magnetism or mesmerism, and then last is spiritualism. It was until this person arrived that we have no longer been processing or practicing this kind of pseudoscientific practices. So, whom am I telling that is the most important person that had more in the psychological timeline? So, he is none other than Wilhelm Maximilian Wundt, or what we know as Wilhelm Wundt. He is the first ever experimental psychologist who have used and have welcomed the term psychologist. The reason behind the birth of psychology, where he was the one who opens the very first psychological laboratory in 1879. Now, we call him as the father of experimental psychology, or for some, the father of psychology. And because of this, because of the action that he separated psychology from the branch of philosophy, it has been the mark or the benchmark of modern psychology.
In the 19th century, psychology was established as an empirical accepted science. While measures would change, the model of research and evaluation would begin to take shape within this 100-year time span.
1879, Wilhelm Wundt establishes the first experimental psychology lab in Leipzig, Germany, dedicated to the study of the mind. 1883, J. Stanley Hall opens the first experimental psychology lab in the US at Johns Hopkins University. 1885, Hermann Ebbinghaus publishes his seminal Über das Gedächtnis on memory, in which he describes learning and memory experiments he conducted on himself. 1888, James McIntyre becomes the first professor of psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. He would later publish Mental Tests and Measurements, marking the advent of psychological assessment. 1898, Edward Thorndike develops the law of affect.
The first half of the 20th century was dominated by the two figures, Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. This segment of modern psychology's history, these two theories established the foundation of analysis, including Freud's examination of psychopathology and Jung's analytic psychology.
In 1900s, Sigmund Freud publishes his landmark book, The Interpretation of Dreams. In the year 1906, Ivan Pavlov publishes his finding on classical conditioning. In 1920, Watson and Rosalie Rayner published research on the classical conditioning of fear, highlighting the subject of their experiment, Little Albert.
The latter half of 20th century centered around standardization of diagnostic criteria for mental illness.
1951, first drug to treat depression. Studies are published reporting that the drug imipramine may be able to lessen depression. The first edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM, published by the American Psychiatric Association. This marked the beginning of modern mental illness classification. This foundational tool is still in use in modern psychology and helps direct diagnosis and treatment. In 1953, APA Ethical Standards, the American Psychological Association publishes the first edition of Ethical Standards of Psychologists. The document undergoes continuous review and is now known as APA's Ethical Principles of Psychologists and Code of Conduct. And in May 1994, the DSM-4 was released. Disorders were added, deleted, and reorganized. Diagnostic criteria, sets, and descriptive text all underwent significant changes.
With the advent of genetic science, psychologists began grappling with the ways in which physiology and genetics contribute to a psychological being in the 21st century.
In the year 2003, genetic researchers finished mapping human genes with the aim of isolating the individual chromosomes responsible for physiological and neurological conditions. In the line of 2010, Simon Levy publishes Gay Straight and the Reason Why, which argues the sexual orientation emerges from prenatal differentiation in the brain. In the year of 2013, the DSM-5 is released. Among other changes, the APA removes gender identity disorder more from the list of mental illnesses and replaces it with gender dysphoria to describe a person's discomfort with their assigned gender. And in the year of 2014, John O'Keefe, May Britt Moser, and Edward Moser shared the Nobel Prize for their discovery of cells that constitute a positioning system in the brain that is key to memory and navigation.
Some of the numerous branches in modern psychology as it stands right now are the following. First is abnormal psychology, which is the study of psychopathology and abnormal behavior, or it is something that is not yet normal in the society or the people in the society are not yet open up into. Second is behavioral psychology, which is the study of how behaviors are developed. Third is clinical psychology, which is the study of assessment and treatment of mental disorders. Next is cognitive psychology. It is the study of how we think. Next is counseling psychology. It is the study of treating clients in mental distress. Next, developmental psychology, how people change throughout the life. Experimental psychology, which is the research of the brain and its behaviors. Next is forensic psychology, psychology within legal settings. Next is health psychology, how psychology influences health and illness. Second to the last is school psychology, which is the psychology of children in educational settings. And then our last one is social psychology, which is the social influences on psychology. So it was all thanks to those many experts. Now, psychology was way more human-friendly and more reliable, for it follows scientific method and has ethical considerations.
Thanks to the contributions of these many experts along the way, now the field of modern psychology has expanded its roots into full subdivisions and specializations.
Montefalcon, Mary Denise Dullier,
Arvin Florentino,
Rose Bantayao,
Martin Javier.
a certified psych mate.